Good evening everyone, welcome to an Aussie Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update. Today the 1st of February 2014, my name's Chris Nitzo. Tonight we'll talk about a very weak tropical cyclone that developed just off the Queensland coast. Its name is Tropical Cyclone Edna. It sort of came out of nowhere. I mean, we did know that there was going to be a bit of a circulation there, and we did mention it in last night's update, although for some reason the Bureau decided to see fit that this particular thing did make just the very low, can I just stress this, very lowest end of a Category 1 possible at some point today, and therefore it was named Edna. Let's have a look at Edna's track. Edna's track, according to the Bureau of Meteorology, looks like it's going to push very much as far southeast as it's pushed already now, and it will from here on push in a west to northwest direction for the next day or so, and then push in a north to northeast direction after that. It's a fair error margin, and if we look now at what the system actually looks like, you can see this morning that we had a very strong convective cluster develop around the center of the system, and then since then it's just all gone down the toilet. It has started to shear away quite dramatically, and we really have not much hope for this system even being tropical cyclone strength. If in fact it ever got to tropical cyclone strength, that still remains doubtful. Some of the ASCAT passes, which is just a pass that shows the wind speeds at the surface, suggested the center of the system had 15 to 20 knots around it, with some very strong gales to the north, but well to the north, very much detached from the actual center of the system. So there's a lot of doubt there as to whether this ever became a cyclone. But look, in the end it's a moot point. The Bureau did name it. It is called Edna. It is a Category 1. It is very weak. It is not expected to cross the coastline of Queensland. It is from here expected to push in a northwest, northeast direction, and then eventually in the far eastern Coral Sea, probably continuing on in a southerly direction in the long term. If we look at the UK Met model here, the model ensemble, we can see that the system pushes basically in a westerly direction for a very short period of time, then in a north, and then northeasterly, and then southeasterly and to south direction later on in the forecast period. So you can see here all the different model members, and eventually there are some model members that do push this back a little bit closer to the Queensland coast, and we will need to watch it in the longer term just in case it gets a ride on a ridge back towards the Q coast. But at this stage, over the next 2 to 3 days, we're pretty happy that it's not going to hit the coast, but it is going to push up the coast almost parallel to it for the first day or two, and then push away from the coast after that. You can see here this is the closest model member that has it going to anywhere near the coast, and it's really an outlier. Most of them do push it northwest, north, and then northeast, and then eventually southeast or south. You can probably see the edge of the circulation just out here, pushing now already in a starting to push at least in a northerly direction already. So folks, it's already finished its southeast movement. It is starting to push back to the northwest, and you can see it just on radar here on the at least the outskirts of the circulation. If we take a look at the Bureau's Access Regional Model here, thanks to Weather Zone, we can see the low or slash, if you like to call it, a cyclone out here today, and as we look towards tomorrow morning, you can see by tomorrow morning the system pushes much further to the west than the UK Met model ensemble had it going. You can see still some fairly heavy rainfall all the way south to about Rocky, getting up to around about or just south of Bowen, so you can see some pretty heavy rainfall over the next 12 to 18 hours there. Then as we head to the 48-hour period, we see it then push in a more north to northeast direction. There it does look to be a fairly broad low pressure region out here, so there may be some interaction with another low out in the eastern Coral Sea. It'll be interesting to see how that interaction takes place. We're not talking about the Gulf low just yet, but we will be very shortly. And then by day 3, we start to see that circulation tightens up, becomes one dominant circulation out here in the far eastern Coral Sea. Now, as I said, in the longer term, it's expected to continue to move in the south to southeast, but there is just the possibility that a new high pressure ridge builds in underneath it in the mid-levels in the longer term, which may result in a push back to the west, but really we're clutching at straws there. We're not sure. There's still a lot of things to happen before we can be a little bit more certain about that. But anyway, folks, that is Edna. Can I just stress again just how weak Edna is right now? I mean, the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre has an even more laxed policy on naming systems. Their policy isn't as strict as the Bureau of Meteorology, and they're not the slightest bit interested in this system. Maybe I'm being a little harsh. It's not entirely correct. They're a little bit interested, but they've only given this a moderate potential to form. So really, they're saying that some of the possible gales that the Bureau based their naming of this system in was due to a collapsing or ending thunderstorm. They're also saying that current conditions around the cyclone are very marginal in terms of its possible development. There's a fair bit of wind shear out there, 20 knots of it, so that's going to be a bit of an issue for it. But really, folks, in the end, it's not going to pose a threat to Australia or to Queensland, particularly over the next 3 to 5 days. Longer term, we'll talk about that as the time gets closer. Don't worry, we'll give you plenty of warning if it does look like coming back towards us. The Northern Territory and the Gulf of Carpentaria is the next thing we're going to talk about, because this could be significant for parts of far northern Queensland and also parts of the Northern Territory. An active monsoon trough will persist over the top end and Gulf into next week. Tropical low, 1,000 hectopascals, located near Katherine. We talked about this low in one of our Facebook updates this morning. It was the same low that was near Wadair yesterday, and the Bureau were talking about it. If it remained offshore, it could have had some potential at a cyclone, but it pushed onshore pretty quickly and is sort of located right in the centre of the territory right now. The low is expected to move east-southeast. It's going to get very close to the southern Gulf of Carpentaria on Sunday. During Monday and Tuesday, it's probably going to be around the southeast Gulf, and that's when they expect it that it could develop. But because of the uncertainty of the movement, and it's a very fine line in the southeastern Gulf, whether it gets onshore or offshore, we have a situation where the system may be in the peninsula, it may be in the Gulf country instead of the Gulf of Carpentaria. So it's a very fine line. That's why the possibilities as we get into Monday and Tuesday remain moderate, because of that uncertainty in position. So here's our low tonight. It was around Katherine. It's obviously pushed east since that particular update, and we can see that it pushes east at a great rate of knots. So by tomorrow morning, it's actually located, according to the Euro, in the southern Gulf of Carpentaria, just inland, and we can see here gales to the north of the system. As we head into Sunday afternoon, we see that the system remains right along the coast, so don't be surprised if we start looking at a tropical cyclone watch possible on the Sunday, depending on how close it is, or as we head towards Sunday afternoon, depending on how close it is to the actual ocean. If we look at conditions in the environment at around about the same time, we look at the wind shear values in and around the system, we can see that if it gets out into the Gulf, it actually has moderate to high levels of vertical wind shear. But if it stays very, very much coastal, it'll have low to moderate vertical wind shear. So it's a bit of a catch-22. If it gets out here, it's going to have the warm water, but it's also going to have a lot of wind shear, which isn't going to allow it to get going. If it stays on land, obviously it can't get going because it doesn't have the water. The other thing we look at that particular time towards tomorrow afternoon is the amount of moisture in the atmosphere in the mid-levels. And we can see that the area here is quite moist, and so there's a fairly good chance of development there's a fairly good chance that won't hinder development. But vertical wind shear is an issue, and obviously its proximity to land is a bigger issue as well. So if we look towards Sunday night, the model pushes this into the ocean of the southeastern Gulf of Carpentaria, and as we head towards Monday morning and then Monday at 10 a.m. we see it right near the West Peninsula coastline, still looking quite monsoonal in fact at that point in time, with some gales, but the gales are a long way away to the north of the system, so not really a tropical cyclone at that point in time. Then the system becomes quite slow moving in and around that area of the Western Peninsula, so it's definitely something we'll need to watch. And then by the time it gets a move on, which is going to happen somewhere around Tuesday according to guidance, it gets a move on back to the west, and by that stage it starts to pack gales to the south it could become a TC in that short space of time it might have over water, because conditions, and let's just have a look there on Tuesday, conditions become a little bit more favourable. Once again, we have a lot of moisture in the atmosphere on Tuesday, and we also start to see wind shear dropping markedly on those couple of days between Sunday and Tuesday. So conditions become very, very favourable for development if the system can get out over open ocean. I guess with Gulf systems, that's always the issue, is that they tend to be so close to land most of the time, unless they develop in the central or northern Gulf. They really don't get much of a chance to get themselves spinning up and get themselves enough time to get a bit of intensity about them. If we then fast forward to about Thursday, we see that the system begins its track back to the west and back into the Northern Territory under the influence of a subtropical ridge which is building over Central Australia at the time. So really, folks, not what Queenslanders are probably looking for. But there is a little bit of model guidance in the European particularly, and the GFS to a lesser extent, of a possible tropical low forming just off the far north Queensland coast. There's also the hint at that the subtropical ridge may not build in time, and this system, rather than sticking around the Western Peninsula, may make it across into the Coral Sea and then push back to the west. So there is a little bit of variability there once we get into the Tuesday to Friday period. But by Thursday, Friday, we definitely expect it to be on the charge back to the west. It's just a matter of how far east it can go in the meantime. It's guided by a fairly strong monsoon trough. It may have an extra little bit of push to get it over far northern Queensland, which will push a lot of rainfall into the area. At this point in time, most of the rain remains well west of the far north Queensland coastline, and even not too much getting into this northern inland area. If the system remains out here and then pushes back to the west, is not the best news for them. But if the system can make it over to the peninsula, even over to the Coral Sea, it will push a lot of rainfall in some moist easterly winds onto the far northern parts of Queensland. So if you look at the guidance there in 3 days' time, according to the Euro ensemble, we see that most of the ensemble is suggesting some sort of low pressure region in here, with some outlying models suggesting a TC there by day 3. As we head to day 4, we can see that that area tightens up or gets a little bit more pronounced on day 4 in the southeastern Gulf. Certainly some of the outlying models predicting a lot more variability there, which suggests that this particular system could be a lot deeper by day 4. But we also see that that area I mentioned just out here off the far north Queensland coastline possibly developing into a weak low at that point in time on day 4. By day 5, we see what I mentioned there, that the system starts to loiter around the southeastern Gulf, and then possibly, once again, the model could be getting confused here, suggesting that perhaps the low pushes offshore and starts to come back towards the coast. There is a lot of doubt by about day 5 as to exactly what this Gulf of Carpentaria low does. Does it stick around here, become a cyclone? Does it just stick around too close to land? Does it push into Queensland and then into the Coral Sea and then start coming back? Not quite sure. You can see a fairly nice strong ridge at the surface, and that's pretty well mirrored in the mid-levels as well, with a nice strong ridge going to push it back to the west. Then by day 6, most of the guidance has the system, whatever it does in this area, pushing back to the west. GFS ensemble, pretty similar there. Day 5, it has it more in the central Gulf of Carpentaria, but the GFS ensemble also picks up that weak tropical low off the far northern Queensland coastline or the Peninsula coastline. So it could be a little bit of interest there over far northern Queensland to see that there could perhaps even be twin systems here. We're not quite sure whether this is just one system being picked up in the wrong spot, or whether this could be one system here and could be a little bit weaker system just out here. Look, that's a great case scenario. If we get the twin systems in this area, we're going to see a lot of rainfall over the far north, over the Gulf country. So there can't be anything too negative about that. And similarly with the GFS ensemble, by day 6 we see that if this cyclone in the central Gulf or southeast Gulf is still there, it's starting to push way back to the west now towards NT under the influence of the ridge. We also see that if that tropical low is over far northern Queensland, it also starts to push back to the southwest and starting to possibly hit the coast again. So really, folks, that's the Gulf of Carpentaria low, the future low. Expectations on it at this point in time. Okay, last but not least, the WA system. The monsoon trough lies offshore, north of the Pilbara, extending eastwards over the northern Kimberley. There is a low in that trough that lies near the Browse Basin, moving east towards the North Kimberley coast. There is a moderate risk that this system could reach TC intensity by Monday or by the end of Monday before it crosses the North Kimberley coast and then weakens. The system could also cross the coast on Sunday, diminishing the risk of a tropical cyclone. So it may be moving too fast, is basically what the Bureau is saying there, for it to become a cyclone. So here it is, folks. That's our low. It's pretty washed out at the moment. There doesn't seem to be too much centralized convection to it. There's a lot of storm activity, but it doesn't seem to be focused around a central point just yet. But that's certainly where we're looking at our low at this point in time. It'll push eastwards and eastwards pretty quickly under the influence of fairly strong northwesterly monsoonal flow. So, looking at the tropical low, in fact, it seems to be that the greatest convection that I just showed you isn't actually the low itself. The low itself is a lot closer to the coast by the looks of that model guidance, but as I say, it's not really well defined regardless wherever you could find it. Tonight we see the system just here, very close to the Kimberley coastline. And then as we head towards 24 hours, it sort of pushes right along the coast. Look, there is a chance at some gales here to the north, but overall the system not resembling a tropical cyclone in terms of its structure. It doesn't really get the time as it pushes onshore tomorrow afternoon up here in the far northern Kimberley. It doesn't really have enough time to get itself going. But there is a chance then it might push into the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf. At this point in time, this particular model, the Euro, doesn't have it doing so. But just to show you the very similar track forecast, the GFS model also has this system pushing in an easterly direction, making landfall right along the far northern Kimberley coastline once again later tomorrow. We see the GFS, though, a lot more likely to make this into a cyclone before it crosses land than the Euro. So I guess there is still that chance that it might make cyclone status just before it. And I mean, if Edna's showed us anything, I mean, if we can call Edna a cyclone, if it has wind fields like that, this will be a cyclone as well. So this is like Sunday night. We're looking at that crossing in the far northern Kimberley. And then as we push into the Monday period, the GFS model keeps it just that tiny bit further to the north and pushes it over the southernmost extreme part of the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf, and then pushes it in a more southerly direction and sort of washes it out here at the WA-NT border. So, folks, that's the current state of our tropical lows. Ex-tropical cyclone Dylan will wash out into nothing very shortly, so he's not worth mentioning today. But there are our other three tropical lows that we're watching. So we've got TC Edna, we've got the Gulf of Carpentaria, which could be very interesting for far northern Queensland. We've got this particular low, which could be very interesting for the far northern Kimberley region, Columbaroo, Kununurra, those areas, and also we may have some type of situation developing off the Peninsula or Far North Queensland coast, but that remains to be seen in the 3 to 5 day period. So that's the latest. Looking at rainfalls tomorrow, tomorrow, not today. Tomorrow we see that central coast of Queensland expecting some moderate falls of rain. Also parts of the tropical coast, Townsville northwards, expecting some moderate falls of rain as well. The Western Peninsula looking at that monsoon trough really raging for them, and also the northwest top end coast, remembering that we have a tropical low or tropical cyclone approaching the North Kimberley tomorrow, so it needs to be watched very closely, and regardless whether it becomes a cyclone or not, is going to dump a fair bit of rain in this area. So we need to watch all of that tomorrow. On Monday, we see that the southeastern Gulf starts to really fire up, and that's That's due to the tropical low or cyclone that could form in that area. We see that whatever's happening in the Coral Sea is pushed out here to the north and possibly to the northeast. But we also see just that potential, remembering, of some enhanced rainfall, moderate to heavy rainfall in that Cairns northwards region on that easterly stream coupled with northeasterly convergence. We also have rainfall all through northern and far northern Queensland as well. Anywhere north of about Ingham, we see a fair bit of rain. Also, over the Gulf country, we see, and the northwest parts of Queensland, we actually see a little bit of rainfall falling, or more scattered showers and thunderstorms, as opposed to the more isolated activity that's been falling so far. Also, over the far northern Kimberley and the western top end, the fun continues for them. As we head to Tuesday, we continue to see moderate to heavy falls here over the Gulf. Moderate to heavy falls also over the North Peninsula. Now the East Peninsula. Remembering, once again, we're watching that area just in case something forms out there by about day 3, 4, 5. So that is interesting. That is interesting us just to see if the model guidance continues with that or not. Over the western top end, we continue to see that tropical low remaining near the WANT border, so it's not moving east anywhere, so it's sort of starting to wash out here, but still creating some very heavy rainfalls. That rain also extends a long way southwards on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we continue to see heavy rain here near the border of WANT, heavy rain on the western top end coast, some lighter falls through the central parts of the top end, central parts of the Northern Territory. Also, the Gulf of Carpentaria remaining very, very active. Once again, the presence of a tropical cyclone or low in that area is going to keep this entire region active, with feeder bands coming in probably off the Coral Sea as well, which we need to be aware of. As we head towards eastern Queensland, remembering we could still be seeing a tropical low in this region, just the hint of it anyway on some of the guidance. So be mindful that these rainfall totals may depend on whether that actually forms. So here's the rainfall chart for the next 7 days, and we've got just moderate to heavy rain over most of far northern and northern Australia. So we just anywhere from about Townsville north looking at 50 millimetres plus over the week, getting some really intense falls here off the East Peninsula, the West Peninsula, the Southwest Gulf, Southeast Gulf, the western top end, the northwest Kimberley or far northern Kimberley. So really, really heavy falls there, folks. Getting as far south, some of that rain getting as far south as just around Port Hedland as well on the west coast, and also getting a fair way inland as well over the days 4 to 8 period. All right, folks, thanks very much for watching tonight. We'll have another update. Probably not tomorrow at this stage. We will try and maybe get an update tomorrow, but I can't promise you anything for tomorrow. We will definitely have an update on Monday. If you need more frequent updates, please join us on Facebook or please purchase our app. Those two things will keep you up to date with all the latest social media updates that we bring. They are a lot more frequent than these videos, and these conditions can change very, very quickly. Thanks for watching. Good night.